All right, so just a reminder that Thursday, so the next time we meet, you have your first exam for my class, exam one. Um, it is over all of part one from the textbook, which we'll finish up today, going through in the lectures. The study guide, quote unquote, for this exam is those multiple choice assignments that you've been working on. So if you've completed all of those assignments that are due on Friday, that is your study guide. That's why I strongly suggest that you do those first, and that you go ahead and print out or save the screen that pops up and tells you the correct answers and all that good stuff after you've completed each of those assignments. Number one, it makes it easy for you to get full credit on those, and it also serves as your study guide. All right. Now, again, the questions will not be in the same order, and the answers will be in different orders. And Amon asked if we can use the study guide for the exam. No, you cannot. The exam is closed book and closed notes. So let's go ahead and talk about that. Now, those of you, the 6 or 7 of you that have been coming to class in person, and even if you have been coming on Collaborate, you are welcome to come and take the test here. That's fine. Okay, you'll come and take it here. We will set you up. You just be just like you are in class. I'll make sure that you have the password to get in, and you only need to have the Respondus Lockdown browser if you are taking it in class. You will not have to have the monitor if you're here with me. Okay, which makes it a little bit easier because I'm here to monitor you. I'll be able to see that you're not using your notes or your textbook or anything like that. If you do elect to take it at home at your own time, that's fine. You have until 8 a.m. on Monday morning to take it. And if you do that, though, you will need to have the Respondus monitor, which means you'll have to have a webcam on your computer. You'll have to give it access to watch you and to record you taking the test. Okay, that's a university policy. That's not my policy. But we've had some issues with folks taking exams at home. So that monitor is going to be watching you, and it does a really good job of catching things. So one of the things it's looking for is where your eye contact is. If you're looking at the camera, looking at the screen, and then looking over here for every question before you answer the question, it's pretty obvious that you've got notes or a textbook out. So it will catch that kind of stuff. It sends me flags and alerts for every test so I can go back and review it on my own time. Okay, yes?
Okay, so this is chapter 3 we're going over today?
This is what?
Chapter 3 we're going?
We're going to start with chapter 3. We're actually going to finish. We're going to go chapter 3 through 10. They're shorter chapters, so we'll go through all of them today. Okay? So also with the exam, if you have a Chromebook, and there are a few of you that have, Casey, I see you. Remind me at the end of class to count you absent. If you have a Chromebook, obviously you know by now that Respondus will not work with the Chromebook, and I've figured out the option for that. Instead of coming and taking it with me, you'll go over to the library, and you can check out a laptop from the library and take it in class, take it in the library there. They have laptops with webcams, so you'll be able to use the Respondus monitor and all that good stuff in there. So you'll want to do that in the library. Okay. You can also, if you would like to schedule a time to have the exam proctored, you can schedule another time to come in with me by sending an email. And maybe during my office hours or during one of my other classes where I'm going to be giving the test anyway, you can come in and take it then, or you can also take it in the testing center. Okay, so you'll look up testing services on the website and send them an email letting them know that you would like to take the test there. Since it's a digital test, you'll be able to use, I think they have some computers over there. I'm not 100% sure. They do, okay. So if you have extended time or you need to take the test without being surrounded by other people, but you do want to take it on campus, that is an option for you. All right, you're welcome to do that. Just remember that it is due, the exam is due by 8 a.m. on Monday morning. Okay, that's what I'm going to go through the grade center and finalize all of those grades, double check the responded stuff, and make sure that nobody was cheating and all that good stuff. Okay. Obviously, if you have consistently had network issues from home and you've had trouble completing assignments, you're probably going to want to come up with another option for taking the test. All right, because it does force completion, so you'll need to make sure that you can get on, and you're going to have a full hour of uninterrupted access. Now, the exam itself is probably not going to take you that long. When I was doing paper exams last semester, it took most students about 20 minutes to do the paper exam, and those that chose to do it digitally over the computer, it took about 15 minutes to do. So you should be fine there. Those of you that come to class to take the exam, that's all we're going to do on Thursday. You'll come in, we'll take the exam, and you'll be free to go. I am not attaching a listening quiz to this one just yet because I want to have some more time to kind of go over those with you. And the listening quizzes are more important for the music history side of things. Yes. Kate, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
So it'll all just be multiple choice?
Yes.
There's no writing or anything?
Correct. The exams are completely multiple choice. They're the exact same format as those assignments. They're just in a different order, and they're all together instead of split up into multiple chapters. Make sense? Any other questions about the exam? I know that's a big thing that people worry about. Lawson?
I'm just curious, do you give multiple attempts at the test, or is it just one and that's the grade?
For the test, that is one, unless there is a technical issue or something happens. I usually don't allow retakes for the test unless there's some kind of extenuating circumstance, but I do drop the lowest exam grade at the end of the semester. So if you bomb one exam, then it's not going to affect your grade at all. And the exams are really a pretty small part of your grade overall. I think it's 20%, and that's spread over, that's going to be over 6 exams because I give, or 5 exams because I give 6 total, and I'll drop one of them. So you will have pretty good chance, and they're really not hard exams. I think if you've taken most college level classes, mine are probably on the easier end of most exams that you have to take. Okay. All right. So if there are no further questions about that, then I want to go ahead and get into the rest of this first part. So we covered chapter 1 and 2. That took a while. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff there for us to unpack. The rest of this stuff, as you can see, is only about 10 slides worth of information. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail about this stuff because if you read the book, if you've done the assignments, you're getting all of it. And this is, like I mentioned, kind of just a brief touch on music theory, kind of very basic music theory stuff. Now, I will tell you, if you play piano or play guitar or something casually and you want to get more into music theory, you think this stuff is interesting, there's a website called musictheory.net that you can go to, and it'll actually take you through some pretty in-depth music theory stuff, and it's completely free. So it even includes some ear training, so you can learn how to identify chords or identify scales just by hearing them. Now, it's not going to teach you how to have perfect pitch. That's a kind of a natural physical phenomenon, but it will at least teach you how to recognize major chords versus minor chords and things like that. Okay, so chapter 3 in the textbook deals with rhythm. The basic definition of rhythm is that it is the flow of music through time. Okay, this is where we start to dig into that idea of duration that we kind of skipped when we talked about the 4 elements of music. All right, so rhythm is the flow of music through time. It also, the way that it works is that we have a particular arrangement of note lengths. So we create rhythm by having different note lengths throughout time. Okay, and we divide time into a few different in a few different ways. The most basic is the beat. Right? We've all heard of the beat. We all kind of understand the beat. If I play a piece of music that has a steady beat, you can all pretty much tap your feet along with the beat, or you could clap along with the beat. That's that steady pulse, the recurrent pulsation that goes through the music. Okay, especially modern music and popular music that has a drum set, or a drum machine involved, you could easily feel that beat because that's what it's designed for. Most pop music these days is designed to be dance music, so it's got a strong pulsating beat. But even in classical music, most of the time we can feel that regular pulsation that gives us the beat there. Okay? And the beat divides the music into equal units of time for us. We use the beat, we use how many beats per minute to determine kind of how fast or slow the piece of music is. So if I said it's 120 beats per minute, well, if you do the math there, how many seconds are in a minute? 60, right? So 60 beats per minute is 1 beat per second. So 120 beats per minute will be 2 beats per second. And it's pretty easy to find kind of some of those basic units. If I look at my clock over here that has a second hand, that would be about 60 beats per minute. 120 beats per minute would be twice that. Another way to think of 120 beats per minute is as march tempo. So if you think bum 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 bum, that's your 120 beats per minute, your kind of standard brisk march tempo. Most dance music hovers around 120 to 132 beats per minute. A lot of pop songs are usually in that zone generally. Okay? And then we can take those beats and we can actually group those beats together to create what is called a meter. And that's telling us how many beats, how we're going to divide these beats up, whether into units of 2 or 3 or 4. That's the most common way to do it. Okay? And then we can also think about how we're going to subdivide those beats, whether we're going to subdivide them into 2 or 3. Okay? So online people, I'm going to walk away from the camera here and come over to my piano. And hopefully you'll be able to hear me playing. So I'm going to play a chord progression, and I want you to kind of think about where the beat is falling in this chord progression. Intentionally kind of banging out the beat there, so hopefully you can kind of feel that pulse as like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and you can kind of get that beat divided up. And I'm changing chords every 4 beats, so we would say that this meter uses 4 beats per measure, and we would probably call that 4/5. And I'm also pulsating in a way that has 2 subdivisions within each beat. So you have 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, 1 and 2. Whereas if I were to put 3 in there, it would give it kind of a lilting feel to it. So that gives it that 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Still 4 regular beats, 1, 2, 3, 4, but they're divided into 3s. 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 3, 2, 3, if that makes sense. Okay, we talked about the accent where we emphasize a note. Now, when we're talking about weak and strong beats, generally our downbeats are going to be our strong beats. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and we put a little bit of an emphasis on those. We put a little bit of an accent on those naturally. Now, if we were to take that accent and move it away from where you would expect it to fall, we get what is called syncopation. And when we talk about jazz, we're going to talk a lot about syncopation. When we talk about fugues and some of this early polyphonic music, we're going to talk about syncopation because that's one of the things they do to really make it stand apart. So instead of doing something like 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, if I were to accent some of the weaker sides, 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, you hear that little bit of syncopation. Or in Dixieland or jazz music, you might get. So you're getting ba-da, ba-da, da, 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 where the accent is being placed on the upbeats there. And that's what syncopation means. Okay, when we talk about tempo, I've already kind of mentioned this a little bit. We talk about how many beats per minute are coming along. Tempo means the speed of the beat or the pace of the piece of music. Like we had with dynamics, we used Italian terms to indicate those, so we don't always have to use the exact metronomic markings. Now, the metronome markings tell us the exact tempo so that you can pull up a metronome and type in, okay, I need it to be 66 beats per minute and go with that. But the Italian terms just kind of give us an idea. Most composers, they're not going to tell you a specific beat per minute that you're supposed to use, especially older composers. In classical music and romantic music from hundreds of years ago, they would just put the Italian term. They're not going to give you the specific metronome marking. And you just kind of have to go from there. It's like with dynamics, it's relative. So the common ones that you might need to know are here. And this list actually goes from slowest to fastest. So if you were to have a question that says which of these is faster, that's kind of where you get these. So the slowest Italian term that we typically use is largo. If you kind of think of lethargic, they kind of go together. So largo, which directly translated means broadly, and that's going to be between 40 and 60 BPM. Okay? Adagio is still very slow. It means slow and stately, or at ease is the literal translation there. And that's going to be from 66 to 76 beats per minute. So there's a very famous piece of music called Adagio for Strings by Samuel Barber. It's a 20th century piece of music. It was used in the movie Platoon, a pretty famous piece of music. But it's slow and stately and has that kind of steady, slow pace to it, right? Andante means at a walking pace, and that's between 76 and 108 beats per minute. Moderato, of course, means moderately, which is the sort of right in the middle pace, and that's between 108 and 120. Allegro means fast or quickly and bright, and that's your march tempos for anywhere between 120 and 168. That's a pretty broad range of tempos that you could use there. Allegro, typically, if I see a piece that says Allegro, I'm usually going to conduct about 130, 132 beats per minute, generally. And then you have Vivace, which is lively and fast. It's slightly quicker than Allegro. It's somewhere around 140 beats per minute. And then Presto is very fast, and that's pretty much above 168 beats per minute. You're going to have Presto music. It's going to feel very fast paced there. Okay, so familiarize yourself with some of those terms. You don't necessarily have to memorize all of those beats per minute that go along with them, but just kind of have an idea that a largo or adagio means slow. As we look at our listening assignments and our listening outlines, we're going to see those terms show up for the different sections of music or the different pieces. It's going to tell you if it's largo or allegro or vivace or something like that. And sometimes we'll see some other Italian terms. And I encourage you, if you come across an Italian term that you don't know in your listening outlines or something, if we're in class, ask me about it. If we're not, look it up. I'm pretty good with the Italian terms. I know most of them, but I'm a little bit out of practice because I mostly play modern music these days. So I don't have to deal with them as much. But you can always ask me. You can always look up exactly what they mean. If you actually look up Italian tempo markings, there's a Wikipedia page that has something like 75 terms listed there. So there's all kinds of different terms. There's also some other little terms that they throw in there. You can see up here like molto, non troppo, accelerando, ritardando. Accelerando means that we're going to go faster. We're going to accelerate. Okay, that's what accelerando means. Retardando means we're going to slow down a little bit. Okay, molto means more. So like molto allegro means a little bit faster. Things like that. Okay, so music notation. I would love to spend 3 days talking about music notation. I actually, last semester, I worked it out, so I had a couple of days to do it, and I had my students actually write out some music notation. I'm not going to do that. We don't quite have the time this semester. But again, if you go to musictheory.net, you'll find some good stuff about music notation and the way to figure things out if you really want to learn how to read music. So music notation basically allows composers to communicate their ideas to others. Before the advent of music notation, music was all passed down by rote, meaning that you would have these monks in these churches that would learn the melodies, and then they would just sing the melodies to everybody else, and they would learn it that way. Eventually, we did start writing stuff down. By the time we get to the 12th century or so, we start to see written music showing up pretty regularly. And by the 14th century, we have pretty close to our modern notation system. Next week, when we look at medieval and Renaissance music, I'll show you some sheet music from back then that it's even if you've read music before, it looks completely different. It is a very, very different style of writing. Okay, so bringing the printed symbols of a page of music to life is the job of the performer, and that is an exam question. So if I'm the performer and I'm looking at a piece of music, it's my job to interpret the music that's on the page and figure out what the composer wanted or figure out the best way to reflect that work. Older music has less markings on it. If you're looking at music from the Baroque era or earlier, you're going to have very few dynamic markings. You're going to have very few symbols to tell you how to play it. You have to kind of figure out the best way to play it, what sounds the best to you. And that's one of the beautiful things about it, is that if you listen to two different people play the same piece of music, they're probably going to interpret it a little bit differently. And if it's a major orchestral piece, the conductor is usually going to be kind of helping to define that as well for the performers. But ultimately, the performers are the ones that are figuring out exactly how they're supposed to play stuff. When we notate pitches on the staff, we use 7 letter names, A through G. And as the letters go up, the pitches go up. It's a pretty simple idea. If I start on A, and I'll just start on a lower A for now, but if I make my way up the scale, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, I'm going up, and then we get to another A. Okay? The flats and sharps that are added to that, they just tell us, they give us the notes in between, the black keys on the piano. And you don't have to worry too much about that. The staff is what we call the 5 lines that you can see here where we put music. And then we have a grand staff that piano music is written on, and it's actually a treble clef and a bass clef stacked on top of each other. So let me kind of talk about the clefs real quick. So this is the treble clef. You've probably seen that before. Is also sometimes called the G clef because this little curly Q here curls around the note G. All right, and that's one way to for us to read that. Now, I'm going to write this on the board, and then I'll put it on the whiteboard in there. The G clef originally, let's see if I can still do it, looked like that, which is a cursive G. And then the line that would go here would tell you the note G. So I'm going to pull up a whiteboard here. Let me see if I can draw it with a mouse here. Never done this before. Hey, look at that. So that's what the original treble clef would look like, and that note was the note G. So it originally looked like a G clef. Now the bass clef, which now looks like that or something like that, you guys can see it on the board here, and I'll pull it back up for you guys to see, is sometimes called the F clef because the notes, the line between the two dots is the note F. And that originally looked like that. It just looked like an F, not even a cursive F. It was just kind of a fancy F, like that. And then you would have the F line in the middle there. Just a little bit about the history of the clefs, but that's one way to help you to figure out where the notes fall when you're reading music. Okay, if you can figure out where G is on the treble clef, you can just go from there. All right, so when you go up in pitch, you go up the treble clef. All right, so what note comes after G if you're going up? A. We go back to A. So this next space after G is going to be A. And then we just count up the alphabet. A, B, C, D, E, and F. Okay? If we start at G and go down, we have G, F, E, D, and then C is actually underneath. We have what's called a ledger line that would be underneath there. And I think, do I have on the next slide? No, I don't. Okay. On a grand staff, you would put middle C actually falls directly in the middle of the staff. So we go F, G, A, B, and then we would have a ledger line above, which would just be a small line that we would place that note on, and that would be C, your middle C. One of the reasons we call it middle C. Okay. Now, for rhythm, we have certain note heads that indicate different lengths. We're not going to get too far into that. You don't have to worry too much about it. There's a chart in your book that kind of shows you some of that stuff if you're interested in it. But we have different note heads, different shapes of the notes to tell us the lengths. And they're all divisions of one another. So the whole note, which just is oval, you can think of it in terms of 4/4 time, where a whole note is 4 beats, or you can just think of it relatively. It doesn't matter what time signature you're in. A half note is always going to be half the length of a whole note. A quarter note is always going to be half the length of a half note. So if you're in 4/4 time, a whole note is 4 beats. A half note then is going to be 2 beats. A quarter note then is going to be 1 beat. An eighth note is going to be a half a beat. And that's kind of the most common way that we think about it. But we do have some differences with different time signatures. We're not going to get too heavy into that just yet. Okay. You can also add a dot next to a note head on the right side of it, and that extends the duration by half. So if we're in 4/4 time and we have a half note, which equals 2 beats, we put a dot next to it. We're going to take half the length of the half note, and we're going to add that on. So that would be 3 beats total then. Okay, and that anytime you see a dot, that's all it's doing. You guys don't have to worry too much about it. We're not going to dig too much into music notation. We use rests in music to notate silence, and they have their own special symbols. When we look at meter, the meter signature typically shows up at the beginning of a piece of music, and it looks like a fraction. So you'll see like 4/4 or 2/4 or 3/4. And that's telling you two different things. The top number is telling you how many beats are going to be in the measure. So that's the easy one to figure out. So if you're in 4/4 time, the 4 on top is telling us that there's 4 beats in a measure. If you're in 3/4 time, the 3 on top is telling us that there are 3 beats in the measure. And then the bottom number is indicating what kind of note is going to count as 1 beat. And the easy way to think about it is in 4/4 time, if you change that 4 to a 1, you get the fraction 1/4, which can also be called a quarter. And that's telling you that a quarter note is going to equal 1 beat. Okay, if you were in 4/2 time, the half note would equal 1 beat. If you were in 4/8 time, the eighth note would equal 1 beat. Again, you don't need to stress too much about that. We generally see the time signature at the beginning of the piece, and then if the meter's going to change throughout the piece, you'll also see it show back up there. This is why I shouldn't click on things. Okay, here we go. Continuing on, melody is another term that you need to know, and I'm going to give you the basic definition of it. A melody is a series of single notes that add up to a recognizable whole. Now, single notes is the thing you need to remember about melody. It is a series of single notes that add up to a whole. Okay? Some motion that you need to understand in melody is stepwise or leap motion. So if the melody moves by adjacent letters, so if I go C, D, E, F, G, that's considered stepwise motion. I'm moving by step. But if I skip letters, then it's said to move by leap or step. If I go, then I'm putting leaps in there. Okay? Most melodies have a climax of the melody, which gives you kind of an indication that it's a full melody there. You don't need to worry too much about that. Legato means that we're playing it smoothly. Staccato means that we're playing it very clipped. So legato would be like da 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 da, whereas staccato would be like da 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 da. All right. Melodies are made up of phrases, which you can think of as kind of a sentence or the parts of a sentence that can usually be sung in one breath and usually ends at a point of rest there for the melody. So if you think of your melody as a paragraph, the sentences that make up that paragraph are your phrases in the music. Okay? So for example, if we took a very famous and popular melody, is a complete melody, but it's made up of 3 different phrases. The first phrase goes, that's phrase 1. Phrase 2 goes, and then phrase 3 repeats phrase 1. So that long melody is broken up into 3 different phrases. A sequence is where you take a melodic fragment or idea and you just move it up or down the scale. So and this is very common in music, if I do something like, and then, see, I screwed it up. If I was doing something like that, where I took a basic idea and moved it up or down the scale, that would be a sequence. All right, a cadence is where we kind of reach a stopping point or a breathing point in the melody. And sometimes we have complete cadences, sometimes we have incomplete cadences. So if I play a melody, let's see how well I can compose on the spot. If I play a melody that goes, that feels complete. We feel like we've ended the melody at a good note. Whereas if I go, that doesn't quite feel so complete. You want it to go on so that we get back to our home chord. And once we add harmonies to that, it'll start to make a little more sense. Okay, so melody is individual single notes. Harmony, on the other hand, is how we construct chords and how they follow each other. When we start putting multiple notes stacked on top of each other, we create a chord. 3 or more tones sounded at once creates a chord. Chord or harmony is simultaneous tones, whereas a melody is a series of individual tones. Okay, and then if we take certain chords and put them in a group, in a progression, we call it a progression, where we have a series of chords moving along. And there are some pretty famous and common progressions that we hear in pop music. One of the ones that you hear a lot, if you're a Lauren Daigle fan, you'll probably recognize. Let me see if I can play it correctly. Extremely common chord progression. All right, and there are a few other chord progressions that we just hear over and over and over and over and over and over again. If you want to watch a little bit of humor having to do with chord progressions, look up Pachelbel Rant on YouTube. It's a guy that played cello in high school, and he got really tired of playing Pachelbel's canon because it's the same, like, 6 or 7 notes or something over and over again in the cello part. And so he started playing guitar and learning pop songs, and everything used that same exact chord progression. So he goes through this like 3-minute long rant playing different songs that all use the Pachelbel's canon chord progression. It's pretty entertaining stuff. When we talk about consonant or dissonant harmonies, I've used those terms before. Basically, stable or restful chords that sound nice, are your consonant chords, whereas unstable or tense chords are your dissonant chords. And when we move from a dissonant chord to a consonant chord, we call it a resolution. We have resolved the progression. And it's that resolution that kind of lets you know when we've gotten to the end of a phrase or the end of a piece of music. Music is all about that tension and release. So if I play, again, I'm going to play a very simple chord progression. When I get back to, that has a very nice consonant restful feel to it. However, if I went and I just left it hanging on that chord, most of you will feel that pull that it wants to resolve. We want to go. And when you feel that next chord, you feel that kind of release of the tension. That is your resolution. And you hear this in music all the time, film music especially. You get these very tense and stressful chords, and then it resolves into something nice whenever something satisfying has happened on the screen. All right, this is, again, getting kind of deep into music theory. We're not going to focus too much on this. So the simplest, most basic chord in music is the triad, which is made of 3 different notes. And if you look at it on the staff, it's 3 adjacent spaces or lines on the staff. It's stacked up in thirds. If we were to look at a scale, for instance, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C is a C major scale, and we were to take every third note from that scale, we create a triad from it. Okay, and I'll play that example here. So if I took a C major scale, and I said, okay, I'm going to start on C, I'm going to skip D and go to E, and then I'm going to skip F and go to G, then I've created a 3-note chord, which is a triad. And I can move that up and down the scale and get different chords. And some of them sound more consonant than others. Okay? Pieces usually begin and end on our tonic triad, which is the most stable. It's built on the first note of the scale. So again, if I were in C major and I built a triad off of the note C within that key, it would be C, E, and G. That's going to be the beginning and the end, usually, of the piece of music. Okay? The dominant triad is built on the 5th note of the scale, and that gives us a very unstable feeling it wants to resolve. For example, you want that to move back. Right? That's called the dominant. If I break up the chord and play individual notes at a time, it's called an arpeggio. So if instead of playing, if I go, I'm just outlining that chord with and playing it what's called an arpeggio. I'm playing the notes of the chord individually, which breaks it up. Yes. All right, the key of a piece of music is where the harmony and the melody are, what the harmony and the melody are centered around, whether it's a major scale or a minor scale. So if the entire piece is based around the C major scale, then we say that it's in the key of C. If it's based around the F minor scale, then we say it's in the key of F minor. Okay, and you don't need to worry too much about major and minor, other than that minor tends to sound sad, right? As opposed to major, which tends to sound more happy. So if I was to play in C major, you're probably getting tired of this chord progression by now. Question? Yes, of course. That tends to have kind of an overall happy feel to it. If I were to switch to C minor, you start to feel that spookiness a little bit, right? If I add other notes to it, it gets even spookier. So our major keys tend to be happier, our minor keys tend to be sadder. When we look at long pieces of classical music, they're going to change keys throughout the piece of music pretty frequently. So Beethoven's Fifth Symphony in C minor, for example, starts in C minor, but within the first movement of that piece, he shifts through several different keys, but he always comes back to C minor at the end of it. Most pop music that you listen to is going to all be in one key. Okay, very rarely are they going to change. Sometimes they'll move up or down a little bit just to give a certain feeling, especially if you're listening to like gospel music. A lot of times we'll move up or down a key just to give it that kind of feeling. One of the cool things about different keys is that you can take a song and play the same song in a different key, and you can still recognize that song. So for people like me, like I have a pretty low voice, so I have a hard time singing most pop music. For me, I like to take popular songs and lower them to fit my range, but you probably wouldn't know the difference whenever you hear it. You still recognize that song. Okay. The key signature is a set of symbols at the beginning of a piece that tells you what key you're playing in. It shows you all the sharps and flats that you're playing in. I'm not going to ask you to recognize those, so you don't have to worry too much about it. The chromatic scale actually utilizes all 12 of the notes within the octave. We're going to talk about chromatic music later on. I'm not going to worry too much about key signature. If we change keys, we call it a modulation. And a modulation kind of gives you a temporary lift. It feels like you've moved in some way. It gives you some kind of motion. That's one of the reasons that long pieces of music tend to change keys, because if you had a 45-minute symphony that all stayed in the same key for the entire piece, it's going to get kind of boring. You want to feel that shift to other keys through there. And the tonic key, much like the tonic chord, the tonic key is the main key of the piece, and that's how we name the piece. So if it's Little Fugue in G minor, that the tonic key of that piece is G minor, although it's going to shift around to some other keys. Okay? Returning to the tonic key, much like returning to the tonic chord, gives us that feeling of resolution and conclusion. And we'll listen to several pieces of music that use this, especially as we get into the Baroque and classical eras here in a few weeks. Okay, I'm going to power on through. So musical texture is something that we do need to talk about a little bit, because you're going to hear about this a lot. And I'll keep defining these for you as we go along. So the musical texture is how we layer the sounds up and how those sounds relate to each other. How many voices do we have on each thing? So we're going to go from kind of the most simple through the more complex textures. So a monophonic texture, as you might suspect by hearing the word mono, has one unaccompanied melody. Gregorian chant is mostly monophonic. It's one melody being sung by a whole bunch of different people. If you were to hear a flute solo, a flute player by themselves, that would be a monophonic melody. Okay? If I add another line to that, playing something different, that would be a polyphonic melody. There are multiple melodies happening at the same time. And this next one is where it can be a little bit confusing when we talk about homophonic texture. Homophonic texture is similar to polyphony in that there's multiple things happening, but for the most part, we mean that we have one melody and then chords moving underneath that. Okay, so if I were to take a melody like and I were to add a simple harmony underneath that, that would be homophonic texture, because all that second line is doing is providing a harmony. Whereas if I were to go with my right hand and do something completely different with my left hand, let's see how well I can do. I'm a terrible pianist, y'all. Right, I've got two different melodies going on. You get the idea there. I should have practiced that before class. Then it would be polyphonic, as opposed to just one melody with chords underneath it is going to be homophonic. Okay, changes in texture within a piece give us a little bit of contrast, and we're going to talk about that more as we go along. Okay, we've got to move pretty quickly, so if you need to pull it up on in Blackboard, you can pull up the PowerPoint as well there. Okay, when we talk about musical form, we talk about how we're organizing the piece of music, how we're organizing these different parts of the music. All right, we have repetition, where we restate musical ideas. We have contrasting ideas that are different to avoid monotony and to make it a little more interesting. And then we have a variation, where we rework ideas to keep them new. You might remember listening to The Young Person's Guide to the Orchestra in listening assignment 1.2, and that is a theme and variations, where you have one main melody and then the composer reworks that melody, Benjamin Britten in this case, reworks that melody over and over again in different variations. We have two basic types of musical form: ternary, which is a 3-part form, and binary, which is a 2-part form. And we'll talk about, as we talk about different pieces of music, the different types of form that you hear. We'll get into detail about that later. Okay, and then finally we come to musical style, which is the characteristic way of using melody, rhythm, tone, color, dynamics, harmony, texture, and form that composers use. All right, and each age, each era that we're going to go through has some basic style stuff that is similar. Next week, we'll talk about the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. We're going to combine those together into one. And then we'll get into the Baroque period, the Classical, the Romantic, the 20th century, up to 1945. And then we'll go from 1945 to the present. Right? And those musical styles are shaped by political, economic, social, and intellectual developments throughout history. All right, we put all that stuff that we just talked about, all that music theory stuff together, we create the style of the piece of music. Okay? All right, that was a speed run of part 1, chapters 3 through 10. I'm sorry that was such a long and quick lecture. If you have any questions, now's the time to ask. Otherwise, you can shoot me an email. If you have any questions about stuff that's going to show up on the test or assignments, things like that, feel free to email me. Otherwise, you're free to go. I even managed to get you out of here a little bit early.